All right, we're going to go ahead and get started this afternoon. Once again, welcome to Engage Community Power for Policy Impact. I am Lourdes Perez, Director for All Children Thrive California, known as ACT, and I've been involved in ACT since 2019 under Public Health Advocates. I have remained focused on improving child and family well-being through policy systems and environmental changes for about 19 years. So really appreciative of being invited to do a presentation on community engagement for policy change and systems change efforts. Also, in All Children Thrive, it just really gives me a great opportunity to work alongside communities to offer support, especially communities that have been underinvested in progressing social justice and creating protective environments for all children to thrive here in California. So I'll turn it to Dr. Todd Franke and Jared Shore to introduce themselves. They are my co-presenters this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Todd Franke. I've had the pleasure of working with Lourdes for many years now and PHA. I'm a professor at UCLA, and this has been a great project that we've been involved in, and we hope to share some of it with you. It's way more involved than just today, but we hope to share some of it with you today. Jared?
Thanks. I'm Jared Shore. I'm the data manager on All Children Thrive. I've worked on All Children Thrive almost since its inception, but 6-7 years ago. And I have the privilege of working with communities to help them track down and better understand the data that they need in order to make the policy change that they're pursuing. Well, pass it back to Lourdes.
Thank you so much, Jared. Todd as well. If you can start screen share for us, Jared, that would be greatly appreciated. And before I move on, I also want to shout out Crystal Harding, who is one of our awesome coaches in All Children Thrive. So she's here with us in the session. Thank you once again for being with us this afternoon. If you can go to the next slide for me, please, Jared. The next one over. So this afternoon, we're planning to do a brief overview of ACT, also key principles of community engagement, strategies for building trust and co-creation, why we focus on local policy efforts, using data to inform policy, and we'll have a digital story map activity, and then we'll do Q&A at the very end of the session. So we ask that you please hold your questions. You can put them in chat or hold them till the end of the session. So the objective is that you'll gain understanding of these key principles and the importance of community engagement in shaping policies and systems change. That you'll also be able to identify effective and non-effective strategies that we have employed to build trust and foster meaningful collaboration with diverse communities. And we're also hopeful that you'll develop practical skills as you see the tools that we have utilized to co-create the initiative and policies, really reflecting the community needs and the aspirations. So this afternoon, we want to start with a couple of questions to all of you. And I want to invite you to respond to the chat to this question. How do you engage community? So if you can please add your responses in the chat for us. We also would like to ask a few other questions. So how well do you currently engage your community as a second question to that? So please, I invite you to respond. We just want to see what you're doing already around community engagement and how well you think you are doing that community engagement in your respective communities. Okay, so listening sessions. Also thinking about connecting with trusted leaders and how to initiate collaboration. That is the second question that we're asking that you also respond in chat. How well do you currently engage your community? Thank you, Toya. By holding and attending community meetings for various systems of care partners, a part of different collaborative efforts within our county. So it sounds like you're already doing wonderful community engagement for various purposes. Community is wide, and also doing that engagement somewhat well. hosting and attending community meetings to increase awareness about local services and supports, and just really appreciate your contributions in the chat as well. So to be able, we're going to move on into some of those strategies in just a few seconds. And we too have hosted a number of things to have authentic community engagement in our initiative. So we'll be sharing those next. Jared, if you'll go to the next slide for me, please. So as ACT began, if you'll go to the next one, we'll do a quick ACT overview to give a quick context of what we do in the initiative. So All Children Thrive began as a 3-year pilot project funded initially by the Mental Health Services Act from 2019 to 2021. And then we were reauthorized for 5 more years through 2026 by the California legislature. ACT is overseen by a 14-member equity advisory group. This group ensures that equity remains at the forefront of all our efforts and that the needs of the most vulnerable populations are prioritized in decision-making processes, both for the initiative as well as the local communities. And our vision is that ACT, if you'll still stay on the same slide, please, previous one. Our vision is that ACT becomes a state, California becomes a state where all children thrive. And we do this in ACT by helping California cities and counties prevent childhood trauma, mitigating the effects of ACEs, building networks of people in places across the state. So that means that we work together to identify solutions that transform policy and systems change, really shaping child well-being in these communities. We also bring together residents, youth, city officials, community leaders who know their cities best to co-design solutions in the initiative. And we support communities by doing capacity building, trainings, coaching that really democratizes data and raises awareness around ACEs prevention and social determinants of health. Next slide, please. And we also provide grants to nonprofit organizations in the initiative or tribal nations to engage with the ACT initiative. And these ACT-funded communities then engage with what we call ACT design teams. These are really coalitions within each of the projects that bring together the leaders to co-create the policies and the programs and resources to transform their community into
Hi, Sean, how are you?
and spaces where all
I'm well,
children.
thank you.
So they define for us, these design team members, coalitions, define for us how we do things rooted in our vision for justice and healing. And they also give boundaries for what we do and what we hope to create together as we engage in their initiative. These ACT-funded projects are assigned a coach from our staff who will provide technical assistance and provide guidance for implementation. And in addition, we have technical assistance teams on policy, data, research, youth development, communications, and sustainability. So the design team, as you can see here, is really made up of community serving organizations. They have the role of increasing resident awareness and participation through community engagement in ACT, also building trust and integrity with the adult and youth residents, gathering feedback and input from these residents and community members to improve the processes or policies to advance these change efforts that they identify. They also support active resident leadership, so activating the community members to participate, activating advocacy groups and residents, parent groups, etc. We also have community members forming or as members of the design teams. And they participate to spread the word and help implement the policy systems changes that they themselves identify in these design teams. They also promote and advocate for strong, healthy communities, healthy environments, children's health and well-being, family-focused solutions. And they ensure that the policy changes are meeting the needs of residents and that they are sustained. So really holding decision makers accountable to those changes and mobilizing other community members. And the community residents are the voice of the campaign or the social change that is identified. Also, as design team members, we have city and county officials. These are champions for ACT, and they have the power to push an agenda with city council or board of supervisors. So these champions spark a call to action within the elected boards that they serve in. They also work on adopting resolutions and policies, and they ensure that we have an equity focus within that system that the change is being proposed for. And they take intentional action to bring about social change as well. And lastly, we have institutions. So institutional partners will help provide leadership and guidance. They'll help participate as well in design teams to spread the word and implement the changes and ensure that there's an equity focus as well, and that we have a shared vision with the work that they are doing as institutional partners. And they also bring intentional action to the policy and systems change efforts that are being sought out. Next slide. So we have a list of community engagement best practices that we'll be sharing here to foster genuine participation and drive the systemic change. You'll go to the next one. I'll start with inclusivity. So this is really ensuring that all voices are represented by reaching out to diverse community segments, especially historically underrepresented communities. And this really requires explicit inclusion of foster youth, incarcerated youth, LGBTQ youth, rural, immigrant, different abled, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Pacific Islander, Asian communities. By dedicating the resources, the decision-making power is also shifting and shared with these populations, and that they also have cultural authority. Communication with community and transparent communication, and really having that genuine engagement with the community members. And ACT-funded projects, we are asking that they are community driven. And what that means is that the work is done and led and co-designed by youth, by families, by members of the community who are most impacted by the systems, and that have the lived experience from which to draw these smart ideas, these solutions, and that they keep community members informed and also involved in each stage of the project that they select. Active listening, really creating structured opportunities for community input through listening sessions. I know we mentioned those in some of your work, meetings, surveys, digital platforms, and incorporating their feedback again in that decision-making process. Capacity building and empowerment. We provide trainings, we provide resources, leadership opportunities that really enable community members to drive their own initiatives and advocate for the change. And we offer a series of policy advocacy trainings, youth leadership forums, data and communication trainings, among others. We also focus on long-term commitment and sustainable engagement rather than one-time events. So establishing and maintaining consistent communication to build trust over time. This is mainly developed by our coaches as they are working with the ACT-funded projects and all of the members within the projects. They really focus on relationship building and maintaining that engagement ongoing. Flexibility and adaptability. We also want to understand what the community feedback is, and that there may be pivots in the communities and what's most relevant, and that the project remains relevant and effective for the needs that they're identifying in community. We've also engaged community through different outreach methods like in-person meetings, online forums, webinars, social media, interactive mapping tools that you'll get to see a little bit in the digital story map activity. And we really target accommodating different preferences and different languages as well. Collaborative partnerships is the last one I'll mention here, and this is really building strong relationships with other local organizations, with leaders, with other stakeholders to co-create solutions and share that ownership of outcomes. I will say we have also experienced challenges in ACT, such as difficulty navigating the political climate, really garnering the support and keeping community members engaged throughout the process. The ACT-funded projects work on a 3-year policy campaign, and it's really critical that we celebrate these small wins when we get victories. And not only is it acknowledging the progress that has been made, but it also energizes supporters and maintains that morale for community members and everyone involved. We have also seen some constraints due to limited financial and personnel resources. So really the supports to maintaining community members, residents engaged in the efforts. Also, inconsistent youth recruitment and participation. Because there is a high youth turnover and the need for constant youth recruitment as high school students are busy and some graduate and move on to college. So those are the things that I want to mention. If we please move to the next slide. I will say here, residents are the force for accountability. As I mentioned earlier, they ensure that the solutions are responsive and that they meet the needs of communities. Local organizations also become champions and support the community members. And community engagement is essential in the elimination of inequitable systemic barriers. So it's only possible to improve every child's well-being if we work together to get rid of systems that were designed to privilege some at the expense of others. So this means that we focus on structures that perpetuate community trauma and inequities found in organizations, laws, and policies. Next slide. Community engagement is also important in securing champions for the policy. The residents are key in garnering champions from community-based organizations, healthcare providers, other advocacy groups, as well as elected officials, city and county staff. Next slide. We recently conducted interviews of ACT design teams. So again, these are ACT design team members that responded, and I want to share a little bit of what they told us in terms of the accomplishments that they had in their projects. And you can see that there's 3 quotes specifically that I brought in here, but I'll read one of those. The act of seeing youth take this project with so much respect and responsibility is better serving the community. The skills and exposure each are displaying as participants is mind-blowing to witness. So you can see that they're truly engaged, truly finding meaning into how they engage in the projects and the work that they are accomplishing. And many of them have been successful in policy wins as well. Next slide. This next slide also talks about the interview results, and they provided us feedback and appreciation. All the ACT coaches were very helpful and engaged with my community. The important part was building trust in order to effectively support the community. So that trust building element is very critical to the ACT-funded projects and for community engagement. The next slide. This briefly shows our team of coaches, technical assistance providers. As I mentioned, we provide technical assistance in policy, data, communications, youth development, and other areas. And next slide. So next, what I want us to talk about is community engagement strategies, and really more specifically to policy adoption and how to create sustainable long-term change. So ACT focuses on local policies to create more impact at the local level. And sometimes it can be easier to pass policies and systems change efforts at the local level versus a state. And it also reflects the community needs and concerns within that local community. So our efforts really focus at the local level. Next slide. And what we mean by policy change is that there is a movement created to educate, to influence decision makers, and to create or support policies that positively affect the community. In ACT, we specifically work on policies to improve child well-being and prevent childhood trauma. So this local policy education and advocacy also gives an opportunity for community to exercise power and really bring their power to create these changes that they are seeking from elected officials, from decision makers. Next slide. ACT also specifically incorporates into city and county policies our principles. So we have principles that identify the values and the principles of ACT, and the cities, as they adopt the policies, or counties also are embedded into their practices, into their programs, and some are working on environmental improvement. So those principles are also embedded into those changes. The ACT design teams develop a policy recommendation for implementation with concrete actions that affect city operations and the community. So next slide. So for the next part, we want to ask you to think about the policy advocacy phases, and I want to give us an opportunity to move into an activity. So I will share the policy advocacy steps out of order in the next slide, and I want to invite you to unscramble them, put them in the chat, the policy advocacy steps in chronological order. There's the list of them in the chat. Thank you, Dr. Evans. We have 9 policy advocacy phases listed. As I mentioned, they're out of order under coalition building, develop team, policy development, sustainability planning, evaluation, policy adoption, communication strategies, planning and strategy development, and community needs assessment. So we want to give you a few minutes here for you all to participate in the chat and reorder these, unscramble them for us, put them in the chronological order that you think is right. So we'll give you some time to do that. So if you can number them 1 through 9 for us and reorder them in the order you think is right. Thank you to those that are putting your responses in the chat. I assume you're putting in the number 1 phase that you think is up first. And so thank you for that. Develop teams. We also have conduct needs assessment. Others, what do you think the order of these phases look like? 2 would be planning and strategy development. And number 1, develop teams. So you've listed all of them out. So coalition building, develop team, policy development, policy adoption, then moving into planning and strategy, communication strategy, evaluation, conduct needs assessment, and sustainability plan. Thank you to all of you who are listing your responses. Right, so I'll move us on to our next slide. And this next slide actually is the process map that we use. We use this process map to engage all of our ACT core and design teams to describe the policy advocacy phases. So you can see here, the phases are 9 phases, just like we listed them out. We also have a pre-engagement phase, which is the request for application process. Since these are funded projects, there is a pre-engagement phase that is listed as a policy advocacy phase. And we initially engage by developing teams. So that's the first phase that our projects work on, is bringing these teams together. We want the teams to have all of the diverse sectors represented, as we demonstrated on our design team slide. We have multiple sectors that we want represented, and developing that team is essential to do that so that we're able to move in all of the additional steps together. So all members of the projects are able to drive the project and be involved in all aspects of the policy advocacy. We then move into a conduct needs assessment, so landscaping of the community, gathering either secondary data, if there is secondary data on the issue that they're addressing, and bringing an understanding of what the data tells of the community, as well as gathering primary data if there is a need for us to gather primary data. We have, as a third phase, planning and strategy development. So we begin to think about an action plan for the policy and identifying the policy specific goal, moving into strategizing, including some communication strategies in that phase. And we also have coalition building and develop teams as ongoing things. So develop teams, we have found that is an ongoing effort because we have some attrition in design teams and turnover that we want to continue to recruit and maintain the design teams as strong coalitions that can lead these efforts and are invested in the policy systems change efforts that they're pursuing. And the coalition building is a broader group of stakeholders that you want to have involved and championing the effort. So these coalition building efforts can be tapped into when you're ready to launch any presentation to city council, to decision makers, as well as bringing that movement together of it being a community behind these policy and systems change efforts that they're seeking. Policy advocacy is the next phase. So actually moving into the advocacy steps. So community education, education for decision makers, and doing one-on-one visits with elected officials, as well as a full city council or board of supervisor presentations. Sustainability is also something that we weave in throughout the campaign so that they're thinking about fund development and sustainability of their efforts, even beyond the funding through All Children Thrive, and that they are able to sustain these efforts long-term so that they continue planning for long-term sustainability. And we also have project closeout incorporated here. This is where we would have evaluation performed and being able to evaluate the impact of the project. For the next slide. So we have funded 31 active projects across California. And next, I want to share 2 projects specifically who were extremely successful engaging their communities for their policy change and were victorious also in the policy adoption. So Sacramento ACT, their coalitions that Kids First, coordinated by Youth Forward, brought together 35 youth serving organizations and over 2,000 individuals to convince the City Council to place the initiative on the ballot and larger urge voters to pass the measure. That was in November of 2022. They were successful in doing that. They also, in the process, posted focus groups, conducted citywide surveys to gather the input. After meeting with officials and also coalition meetings, really giving ample of youth opportunities to lead those advocacy efforts, the coalition successfully passed the measure. And the measure created a children's youth fund in the City of Sacramento budget, fully funded by the cannabis tax revenue. After the passage of the measure, led the effort to draft a 5-year strategic investment plan. So the team put together this 5-year strategic investment plan aimed at stabilizing funding, increasing resources for youth services. And in September of 2025, the Sacramento City Council unanimously approved the ambitious plan, which introduced targeted interventions. And this year, also the City Youth Park Community Enrichment Department became the lead implementing agency for the oversight and for the distribution of the funds. So issuing its first request for proposals in November of 2020. So not only were they hugely successful in the adoption of the measure, but also post in the implementation of the funding distribution and establishing the funding mechanism and an oversight committee to continue to have success and sustainability. The next slide. We also have Modesto ACT, and they were also successful with their resolution for equitable parks and protective healthy environments. This passed unanimously on May 7th of 2024. This park equity project was led by a park youth committee, along with Tuolumne River Trust and other local nonprofit organizations that supported, but they identified key parks that lacked equitable access to community members in underserved and low-income neighborhoods. Next slide. They also collected park data through observational assessments and community surveys. So you see some of the feedback here. The Park Youth Committee also developed a data dashboard of their findings to inform the community about their project, as well as elected officials, really leading to news coverage and other city council commitments, which gained a lot of traction. So a lot of the youth were very involved in public comments and presentations to the community in general, but also to the decision makers. The next slide. So they shared the findings throughout the community. As I mentioned, this is some of the data that they were sharing. Next slide also includes some more data around the participants and age groups. And the last slide on that next one is when they did the formal presentation to the City Council, and the Park Youth Committee led all of the efforts, the presentations, the public comments, and were just really acknowledged by City Council and their leadership. So they were successful in passing this resolution and have continued working with the City of Modesto beyond this resolution, now working towards a parks master plan for the City of Modesto. And the youth continue to inform, to be involved, to bring data for that parks master plan update. So it's been a very rewarding opportunity for the youth, as well as the city now incorporating community engagement strategies to inform their process. And at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jared. He will lead us in the conversation about using data to inform policy.
There we go. Thank you, Lourdes. Well, as Lourdes just touched on, a big part of what we do in All Children Thrive with the projects that we support is provide technical assistance in data operations. Basically, helping them to use data to inform the policy decisions that they're advocating for and convince the policymakers and whichever other audiences they need to of the efficacy of their efforts. But first, what is data? we often think, myself included, sometimes revert to a very technical quantitative definition, right? But data could be the temperature outside, the number of steps you've walked on your fitness tracker, the social media posts in your profile, right? All of those are different sources of data. All of them in different circumstances could be useful. And with all of the different, almost infinite number of data sources available, we found in our work that it's most productive to focus first on why a community needs the certain data rather than the source. And so data for the communities we work with tends to fall into three buckets in terms of the use. First is data that's used to better understand the problems that their community are facing. This is why we have a needs assessment, but nobody really comes into these projects with a totally blank slate, right? Everyone brings with their own ideas of what the problems are with their community. Funders, including ours, by necessity have to dictate this is the type of problem that you have to solve, right? So you're only able to back up so far, but it is important, and we found it to be pretty valuable for the teams that we work with to take a step back and evaluate their own biases coming into this and really look at alternatives to the problems that they initially thought were the issue. If there are underlying problems, is there a different way to reframe it? And this has two really big payouts. First, that you don't end up spending as much time pursuing problems that aren't necessarily as much of an issue as you initially thought. And if you've done a good job of it, by the end, you also have built a fairly strong case for why your issue is the issue that should be focused on, right? So the second bucket of data use would be data for determining whether the solution you're focusing on is the correct solution. Similar to understanding the problems, everyone tends to come in with some idea of what the problems are, or at the very least, an area what the solutions are, and some idea of how they would like to focus on them. And here too, it seems to be really valuable to step back, kind of interrogate what you think you know, look at alternatives, because similar to understanding the problem, by really taking your time to think through and confirm that your solution is going to be one of the best solutions, you're saving time that you could have wasted pursuing a suboptimal solution, and also really firming up your case that you're going to need to make towards the end when you're advocating for your policy change. And on that note, the third use for the data is data for persuading, for convincing the people you need to convince that you've selected an important problem and that you've also determined an effective solution for that problem. So those could be community members, policymakers, other stakeholders. And if you've done the first two parts well, really all you have to do is bring in some additional content, a few pieces of information to kind of pad out what you have, and to take all of that and craft it into a compelling narrative for the audience that you're trying to target. One of the instances where we did this with ACT projects was in the Boyle Heights neighborhood of Los Angeles. So the Boyle Heights team was focused on park safety and maintenance in their parks and green spaces throughout the neighborhood. They went out and collected a lot of information through both community surveys and field observations, going out into their parks and documenting all of the conditions of all of the different features and all of the issues that existed within those places. And it really paid out. The policy recommendations that they made were accepted into the Boyle Heights Community Plan. $4.5 million was allocated for investing in Hollenbeck Park, one of the main parks that they were focused on. The money was allocated, I think, towards improved pedestrian access, lighting, and planting more trees to increase shady space. So that was the results. One of the pieces that they used to advocate for those results was their digital story map. And if we could put the link in the chat to that so everyone can access it, I will also show it on screen now. All right. So this is what we were referring to, right? This is a package of their content crafted into a narrative for the audience that they're trying to convince. For anyone who would prefer a Spanish language version of this, there's a link towards the beginning that will open that version of this. All right. I'll give people a moment just to open it and begin to look at it, but we'll walk through it together. All right. So the Boyle Heights team started out by summarizing the problems that their community were facing, as well as punctuating it with adding some of the visual data that they collected through their park observations. They had space to talk a little bit about themselves, about the social model recovery systems, the backbone organization for the project. And then they get to talking a little bit more about the problem that they're focusing all of their efforts on, namely improving the infrastructure of their local parks, laying out some of the issues, and bringing in some of their survey data when they're talking about the quick capture survey. That's the survey they conducted with residents, getting at the overall poor conditions of their local parks. Now, most importantly for this section, this is data collection is where they were able to bring in the fruits of all of their labors, going out and collecting that primary data. So they included some select results from the survey that they administered, talking about dirty restrooms, observed drug paraphernalia, trash accumulation, and you can explore this in your own link to the map, but they included the interactive map generated with all of the content that they captured in their fields report, right? Or they took an image of what they were describing, categorized it, and wrote a little bit of information about it. Which has been great. It's been a good way to engage a number of different audiences. And once they'd already gone to collect their data, it wasn't a huge deal to be developing a visual like that. So they were they're kind of supplementing the primary data that they were building their case around with some secondary data from the 2017 park audits in Los Angeles, where they were able to cite policymakers noting the rundown condition of the parks in their neighborhood. And then finally, they're discussing their own advocacy work, documenting some of their tactics and efforts that they've made thus far. So this came out towards the end, but not at the end of their project, I think in early 2023. And they were able to discuss the youth voice, their efforts to incorporate youth community members in this work, which they succeeded at, and really brought in a number of young people, both in things like creative output, like they did drawings, but also in some of the data collection efforts, which was really great to see. And finally, they'll end with a call to action to drum up more support for their policy position and bring more community members onto their team. I'm going to link to that, though I think now that the campaign is over, I think the link no longer works. And they also included some images of some of the park conditions, some of the other content that they wanted to document, and able to just add some contact information and a few other links throughout. Feel free to go through it in more detail, but they did a pretty good job. And I think it's important to note they did that mostly themselves, without too much assistance from our TA team. And they, with fairly minimal experience working with any sort of data and working completely new to the technology, they really did a great job in kind of just going for it. And it delivered, right? They created a pretty good narrative, and clearly an effective one given the results. So going back to the presentation. So thinking about their story map, all right, I'll do a little bit of a low pressure test for people, but thinking about some of the data that they included and why it might have been effective or not as effective as they wanted. Start about thinking, what types of data did they use in their story maps? I think we covered most of it. We might have left one or two pieces out, but then in the chat, you wanted to suggest a few things that they included. Can be general, they can be specific. Yep, the photos, absolutely. I mean, I think that might be the most impactful part of the data that they collected. Absolutely. Anything else? All right, well, we can discuss that a little bit more in some of the other questions, but if we want, oh, and the map showing the concentration, absolutely. Showing different concentrations of issues at various parks. And you could see, if you look at the map, the park that ended up getting the money was the park that they documented all of the issues for. And the graphs showing the observations, absolutely. That's very important, just to combine the images and the qualitative with the quantitative wrapping up included in the graphs, the summing up. Absolutely. So what about the research methods? I think we touched on this, but does anyone want to have a go at what research methods they used to collect the data that they used? I think we stated some of them. All right, well, I mean, the two primary research methods that they used for collecting primary data, at least, were the survey and their field observations. They also included some secondary data, which I think was a very good decision on their part, really kind of underlying some of the issues that they had found in their survey with the audit from the city. But yeah, there were definitely, we'll talk a little bit about other things they could have done, but those were the key things that they were working on. All right. How about the data that you think would be most compelling to members of their community? There's no right answer for this one. We don't actually know. And I guess on the flip side, what data would be the most compelling to policymakers? Clearly some of it was. All right. The cost? Absolutely. So the cost was a good thing. To include that, I mean, they could have included even more, because that wasn't the focus of the research, but it's definitely something that's compelling to both decision makers and community members. And safety concerns, definitely. Those are things that can really stand out. I think for policymakers sometimes too, avoiding bad things is more of an incentive to act than delivering good things. How it affects their constituent safety and their health, absolutely. And was that it? Impressed by the results of the work. Yeah. Okay. Well, those are all good things, right? And I think all of those could be right. The visuals and the map combined with the mapping so that people see exactly where something is in their neighborhood definitely seem to have an impact based on the feedback that they've been receiving. The data that might be compelling to policymakers, definitely cost and safety are big ones. I think they were pretty smart in using the city's own data from that parks audit. It's a little bit difficult to argue with the information and the conclusions that you or your organization have already drawn yourselves. But yeah, again, we don't have a right answer, which is why it's important to draw on a number of different sources and come at things from a number of different angles. Okay, but probably the most interesting question, I think, would be what other data could they have included to make an even more compelling case to their audience? I always get interesting responses to this one. Increase to property values, absolutely. They would have to be looking at similar neighborhoods in order to estimate a potential increase to property values. But yeah, that could be very compelling, particularly for the people who live immediately around the parks. Anything else? So I think one of the things that we touched on earlier was safety concerns, which can be really compelling to the right audience, right? Now, it would have been an extra piece of work to include things like incident reports and arrest reports, but those are accessible data that you could have even mapped alongside the other information that they collected. They could have also looked at things like the current status of operations in the park, right? It's one thing to go and make a general ask of please clean up our park more. It's very different to say, we know that you're coming by every other week to do maintenance work or to clean up every other week and do maintenance work once a year. We'd like you to come every week and do maintenance work twice a year, right? They're making more specific ask and they're showing that they did a lot more homework. I think critically, one of the other things that they could have done is they don't have much in the way of comparison data, right? I think it's something that policymakers often look for, and they really do need to a certain extent to demonstrate that a problem is an important problem, right? That what they've done is show that there are a lot of issues with their parks. They need to go to the surrounding parks or other parks to show that there is a disparity, right? If everybody has those issues in their parks, then they might not have as much of a case, or at the very least, they have to change, what they're asking for and their tactics going about it. So looking for data to compare, to give you kind of a relative view of your issue and the solutions that you're looking at is often very important as well. All right, but it looks like we're running out of time. So the story map, it's a useful tool. It's mostly, it's as good as the information that you put in and the time you put into it. But it can really help with that final critical piece of taking all of the work that you've already done and formatting it in a way that's going to be more accessible and more compelling to the audiences that you're looking to convince. I'll throw it back to Lourdes to wrap up.
Thank you, Jared. Yes, why we wanted to bring this as a tool that we've been using in All Children Thrive is because it has been very engaging, in particular for youth design team members. They have really demonstrated interest in the research methods, learning how to do data collection, how to analyze and interpret the data for a compelling advocacy case, and really building the messaging around it. So it really has sparked a lot of interest, not only from youth, all projects, adult members also were very interested in the elements. There are other data visualizations that were embedded, like the mapping features, the dashboards that they got to learn how to create those. So this has been one of the elements in projects that has drawn a lot of interest, and that has been very critical for us to support community and that their engagement is meaningful, as they already have very busy lives, and we want to reinforce that their engagement is for continued ongoing efforts and doing ongoing relationship building with them through these applications of tools, and all of that really has been fundamental for us in ACT funded projects. And then also the coach and technical assistance providers guiding them, providing that ongoing support and relationship building as we come into trainings, as we come into developing all of the pieces of the campaigns. And as I mentioned earlier, these campaigns are over a course of 3 years. So we work with them for 3 years and do a lot of build up to bring a very strong, compelling policy case as they move it to elected officials. And all of it is with community engagement driven by the community voice, including the decision making of the project and the policy goal that moves forward. So we'll end here. We have maybe a minute or two for Q&A. If there's any pressing questions that you want us to address, please open up your mic and you can speak them up verbally, or you can put them in the chat. Okay, I don't see any questions coming in. So I'll just close by saying we are seeking reauthorization of funding beyond 2026. As I mentioned, we're funded by the California legislature. We want to continue to progress and expand ACT in communities, really for the shared vision of all children thriving in California. And if we're reauthorized, we hope that we can work with you for new funding opportunities in your own communities. We do have a conference coming up April 2nd and April 3rd. Crystal has added the information in our chat. Thank you so much for being here. Please follow us on social media. You can learn about our work through our social media handles. Our contact information is here for Dr. Frankie, Jared, and I. Please feel free to reach out with any questions if you have any. We also have shared some resources that we hope you can use for your own work in community engagement. We have shared the process map that we embedded into the presentation. We also have a policy menu document called Reimagining Child Wellbeing that has all the policy strategies that we incorporate in All Children Thrive. And we have shared our ACT fact sheet as well. So please continue to stay engaged with us if you're interested, and we would love to work with you in the near future. Thank you so much on behalf of All Children Thrive team.